So there we go. The format for today is slightly different from the other webinars we've done previously. So previously it's been a lot of me talking, but actually I'm going to hand the microphone over this time to David, who will introduce himself shortly. So it's going to be what we like to call a fireside chat in SCVO. So it's a conversation between David and I, just kind of hitting on some of those key themes about speaking to senior leaders. And then hopefully we'll have about 15 minutes at the end just for a kind of general Q&A where you can grill David on all of the things that you want to know. Do try and keep those questions kind of within the realms of digital inclusion though, but I mean, you could ask him about his breakfast, or I know he likes to talk about his dog Sasha as well, so that if that comes up, it comes up. But first off, enough about us. If we use the chat box just to let us know who you are, which organization you're with, and what you're hoping to get out of today, that gives us a really good steer of where the conversation can go. And just while you're doing that, I'll have a little chat around what we're hoping to get out of just the next 45 minutes. And the first one is that bigger question of how do we encourage buy-in for digital inclusion in our organizations? So we hear from a lot of organizations that they often struggle because it's one or two people in an organization that are trying to push for change. So how do we have those conversations with our senior leaders about encouraging change and getting that buy-in? And the second thing that we're hoping to get out of today is that more practical thing of what are the best ways to approach our senior leaders. So some of you might be in organizations where you have really close relationships with your senior leaders. Some of you might not. So what's the best way to kind of structure that conversation? How do we approach it and how do we go about it? And then lastly, just having to think about what the impact can be when we have that buy-in from senior leadership. So what difference does it make to actually have that golden thread through an organization where you've not only got your frontline workers and your volunteers with you, but also your management suite and the people that make those strategic decisions. So that's our plan for today. Hopefully over the next 45 minutes, we'll get some of that kind of great info David, just to tell us a little bit about who he is and what he does.
Thanks, Jason. Yeah, hi everybody. It's nice to be here. A bit strange. It's been a while actually since I've done a webinar and talked. It used to be big in kind of lockdown areas, and now it's unusual. Anyway, sorry. I'm David McNeill. I'm Director of Strategic Development at SCVO. A job title I really hate because I don't know what it actually means, but I can't think of anything better. But essentially, I started at SCVO 7 years ago as Digital Director, which had two elements to it. One was leading the work around digital inclusion that was at SCVO. The other element was supporting the digital transformation, or what we call digital evolution, in the voluntary sector as well through that kind of work. As well as managing our kind of web services team and all our digital services. But kind of restructure 3 years ago, I now look after the digital inclusion stuff, our work for funding, our policy team, and our wider support services team that do the events, training, the gathering, information service, and lots of other infrastructure support. So I've got the wider remit other than digital inclusion, but it's where I started at SCVO, and actually was dragged completely back into it and spent most of my time for the past 2 or 3 years when lockdown hit doing the Connecting Scotland programme. So that was like 80–90% of my time over the last 3 years. Yeah, that was an enjoyable bit of work and a difficult time to do with the support of lots of people on this call.
Excellent. So a good overview of different areas of the organization and not just explicitly digital, which is great for this conversation. So I guess kicking us off first is just thinking about introducing change in organizations. So as a leader, as a senior leader within quite a big organization, what are some of those barriers to change? So what prevents senior leaders from wanting to make changes to services or organizations?
I suppose thinking about change generally, I think any change is hard. I mean, even for people and organizations that say that they like change or think they're innovative, if change involves something that you have to convince someone else to do, or it involves money or resources or time, or even just space to think, it is difficult to do. So I think a lot of times with change, sometimes you will get people sign up in principle, say, yes, let's do this, and then not deliver action. So sometimes it's hard to convince people to do it in the first place. Sometimes it's easy to convince people to do it in the first place, but then actually delivering that change that you want to see is difficult when it involves people actually doing something that's different. There's such strong gravity associated with the status quo or the way that people have always done things, that even minor changes to the way people work can result in some kind of resistance, whether that's intentional resistance because people don't want to change what they're doing, or kind of more passive resistance because people, I'm too busy to think about it, but I'll get around to it next week. And I'm sure there are plenty of requests for help in people's inboxes that everybody's got that's said, oh, I'd like to do that, I'll get around to it, or I'd hope to do that, but we never do. So yeah, challenging the way that we've always done things is really hard.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, yeah.
And is there, so it's that kind of like you said, it's the gravity towards the status quo is such an important thing. It's such a cultural thing in organizations. What's the kind of the competing priorities with something like cash? So money as a big, is that a big enough reason for people to say, no, we don't want to introduce this, even though eventually it might help our service users or it might create better efficiencies in our workforce? Is there still that kind of immediate, this is going to cost money, so we're not interested? How does investment sit in that kind of conversation?
Yeah, I suppose lots of change that you can do doesn't require money, but some does. And particularly for voluntary sector and public sector, money is really tight. And I suppose not just money, like most of our money isn't actual real cash to spend on things. The money is invested in the people, our staff that we work for, and we know like workforce kind of stress is really high, and people have been asked to do things. We've had skilled employees that have kind of left and moved on to other jobs post lockdown. Other sectors, the private sector, competing for employees because there's kind of potentially better rates of pay in places. So that I suppose the cash, if you want to invest in something, you need a real cash in something. You need a really clear business case. But ultimately, it's possibly easier to make a decision about investing money if you have it than it is about trying to make another request of your staff or add things in, because constantly, certainly anything. The phrase I constantly hear, like in management team meetings or with managers, are well, what are we going to stop? If we want to start something, what is it that we're going to stop? And it's harder to make decisions about what we're going to stop. It's easy to say we might start something, less about stopping.
That's interesting. So just thinking then about, if you get those priorities right and you have the right people in the right room to start something new without necessarily thinking about what we stop, and all that's balanced out, how do you kind of start that conversation then? So working with senior leaders in an organization to maybe introduce something like a digital inclusion program, whether that's for service users or staff, what does the start of that conversation look like? And obviously it's different in different organizations, but for you, what would that conversation look like?
Yeah, I mean, I'm thinking more generally, because obviously I'm bought into digital inclusion and it's a big passion, so we're committed to it and we'll do lots of things. And slightly luckily for us, there's obviously we've got grants and funding to be able to do the stuff. So that's one of it's a good thing. But for other people, I think back to particularly roles that housing associations have to play. Housing associations, obviously, that's where a lot of people that are digitally excluded will live. They've got a big role to play in terms of tenant support, but there's a big opportunity in terms of actually when they're transforming their own businesses and support, and the outcomes you can get by supporting tenants, greater employment, better health outcomes, that kind of thing. So there's a real business case in some of those things, but those organizations are kind of big beasts of organizations, lots of corporate and structure and governance and management. And I think when you get to the high level in an organization like that, one of those key barriers is going to be that the perception that digital inclusion is not a major issue, and that I think we saw that from our work pre-pandemic. We felt that digital inclusion was going off the agenda. Everybody thought, because everybody's got a smartphone, don't they? That was the perception, and all these people on Facebook or Snapchat or whatever it might be, that means we've solved digital inclusion. We don't need to do it, but we know that's not right, because we've got the digital skills issues separate from having the right device, which is separate from being able to afford a connection. And obviously, there are people that just didn't have anything at all. They didn't have data. They didn't have the right device to be able. They might have had a smartphone, but no data, or a smartphone's not going to be the best thing for you to be able to support your kids to do homework when you're stuck in the house. So the pandemic clearly showed everyone that digital inclusion was an issue. It's a major issue, and everybody has a role to play in it, because you will be excluding, quite a significant. It's not just the 5% of people that might not have a smartphone. It's the 25% of people that don't have digital skills or have limited data access at home. So it's a bigger issue. So I think for those senior leaders, the first barrier that you're facing is actually this is to show it is an issue for the people that you work with, and it's a real barrier for them, and that the outcomes that they could achieve by being on it. And it was kind of bleeding obvious during the pandemic and during lockdown, when the only way to engage people was really online. And I think what we've seen since then is people forget what happened 3 years ago, forget how much effort went into it 3 years ago to kind of supporting those people, and going back to that perception that it's solved again, or the actions that we've taken, or people could go to the library and use a computer. That's fine. So I think there's a perception barrier first. And then I suppose why you should convince people why is they might get that it's an issue, but the key question is, why should we as an organization take responsibility and have a role in it? And I think that's the thing where you need to think selfishly for the organization. What's the things? And I was thinking about this beforehand, and I've thought about the 3 Ps. Like, how does it fit with purpose of the organization? Where does it fit in a hierarchy of priorities? So there's lots of things that you could do to support people or help people, but why is this a priority? And then there's the pounds element. What's it going to actually cost us to do it? So if you can make a case that this fits with purpose, that it is a high priority, and the financial case would stack up, then that's a convincing story.
I feel like there's a balance there between the hard evidence, so the statistics, the 3 Ps, like you say, where does it fit with us as an organization, but also that that softer stuff, so those outcomes and that storytelling and that understanding of the actual difference. Is that a 50-50 balance, do you think, or is there anything slightly more weighted on either side?
Oh, so that's a hard one. I would say convincing people is about the stories that you can tell about the impact, and the change it can make. And it's stories always will appeal to the heart over the head. And when you're talking to individuals, appeal to their heart. However, if you're in a big organization, some of the heart thing doesn't only go so far. You then need the head, and that you need the kind of strong kind of business case, the data on the information, the barriers, the costs, how much it will be, and why, making a case why we should be doing it. So appeal to the heart first, and then make sure that it stacks up in the head, I think.
So we always talk about using that data-driven approach and always have those facts to hand and always be able to evidence what it is that you need. But what do you think, what is that compelling data? What does that data look like? And obviously that's different for different organizations, but thinking widely about digital inclusion, what is that data?
I'll answer that. I'll come back to the data question in a second. I suppose I've got a story, I think, that appeals to the heart first, and that kind of approach. Because actually one of the best examples that I'd heard about Connecting Scotland of the impact of digital exclusion came from a client that was involved with One Parent Families Scotland. One of their clients was a single mother. She left England with her 4 children to come to Scotland, and she was fleeing domestic violence. And she was described as destitute. She had nothing, like in a kind of refuge, no money, no job, not great English skills either, mental health and problems as well. And she made contact with One Parent Families Scotland, who gave her a device, gave her an internet connection, and the outcomes that enabled her to achieve was incredible. And it wasn't by giving them the device and the connectivity alone that made it. It was the fact that they could connect to their support worker at One Parent Scotland and access that support flexibly and regularly. And through that combination of the support and the thing, she ended up getting something like £30,000 in backdated benefits, secured a house, secured further education, made the children were able to do their schoolwork and connect them to that, and it made a huge impact, and including that, 30,000 plus a financial difference to that individual, not because she was digitally included, but that digital inclusion made her was the gateway to being able to access the services, support, the job the college applications, the complete the benefit form claims, access the counselling and support they needed to move her life from being chaotic to stable. So that kind of case appeals to the head, and there's a bit of data in there as well about actually look how you can transform the kind of life, because there's real tangible outcomes and money involved there. Not every case, to be honest, is going to be that simple to straightforward to identify the outcomes, but there are outcomes. Thinking, so that's the kind of head case, the heart case. The head case would definitely be, well, that's possibly a bad use of term, a head case. The kind of that case would definitely be using data to say, why is this a problem? Well, first of all, this is important. What's the problem? Define the scale, particularly for the people that you're working for. So, what is digital inclusion? And actually talking about it isn't just having access to a device; it's the digital skills. What is, and actually that's a big one, because it's something like 26% of the population in Scotland have low digital skills. So just because someone has a device doesn't mean they're skilled and able to do things like completing basic stuff like forms online. You then have the affordability thing, with how many people can't afford an internet connection. It's about the accessibility of the right device to do the thing that you want, and the competence and motivation in the first place, in this being skilled enough to use it. So there's a different factors to do with digital exclusion you want to present contextually. What's the problem in defining the scale for the people that you work with, and what changes, what would be the impact of changing, upskilling people? What would be the impact of providing affordable outcome, both for the individual outcomes and for the organisation? So define the scale, define what the problem is, define the scale of it for you, and define what the changes, the impact the changes would make for the people you work with, and try and make that relevant to the organisation. I keep thinking back to some of the business cases around housing associations and putting affordable connectivity in. So actually, those business cases stacked up. It was about, people needed to invest millions of pounds to invest in infrastructure to put connectivity in. But the reality was you could make a business case stack up that was cost neutral over time, perhaps by charging people £5 rather than a commercial offer of 20 to get online in the thing. But by giving them the free internet access, you're going to reduce, you're going to enable people to, X% of people to get more of likely to get employment, to do their benefit claims on time. They're going to access more affordable, those type of outcomes that you can show. So the program itself was relatively neutral, but actually would result in impacts on people. And if people are more likely to be kind of able to access their benefit claims, able to access their apply for jobs and other types of support, then they're more likely to be able to sustain their tenancies, as an example. So it's going to have a business benefit ultimately in the end.
I think, there's an important point there. I think that we're fortunate enough to be in a sector that isn't just about pounds and pence and does have that, we've got that ability to really kind of tug on those heartstrings, because these are powerful and important stories, and it's not just about how much profit's being made as a result of introducing this at the end of the day. So that's a good reflection. And just thinking about, I guess, kind of moving towards the end of the conversation, the impact. So we know that a lot of organizations struggle with kind of engaging senior management in this kind of conversation for lots of different reasons. But what difference does it actually make, in your opinion, to have that input from senior management? How important is that, and what can the impact be as a result of it?
I was thinking about this question beforehand, and I was like, I think it depends. Sometimes a group of really passionate people can make change happen from the ground up. I can't what is that saying, that like a small group of committed people can change the world, and it's true. But so ask forgiveness, not permission. Get on and do something. Work with the people in an organisation that that do want to do something, that want to try something. They work with the willing, because there will always be people that resist change or don't want to do something. So start with the willing and show the impact that you can have. And almost starting at that level does give you then say, well, we've tried it. It's not too painful. Gives you that evidence to take to managers. So change can happen from the ground up, but some things you need, resources and corporate support for. One, if we are actually asking for money to put in some infrastructure, you can't sneak a few like a internet kiosk into the corner without anybody noticing, or somebody going, "How did you get that computer?" And I think having a champion, so you'll need that corporate support to get money signed off. But also there's that showing it as a priority. There's kind of a demonstration of the value that this is a support. This is a priority. It is important. That's what that can show, and it's a way of convincing those resistors to change, that don't want to do it. So yeah, I think senior leadership is important in some of those things, but change can happen from the ground up. Build momentum, work with the willing, and if people see enthusiasm for it, that's much more likely making the business case easier to make if it's already happening and is already delivering results.
Yeah, I like that reflection, that even if it feels kind of insurmountable at the minute to have that conversation, make that change happen, it's possible. So I guess the last thing for me before I kind of throw you to the wolves on the call is just, if there is one takeaway from today, from this conversation for everyone about chatting with senior leaders about digital inclusion, what is it? What would you want everyone to take away from today?
be really clear on the impact that being digitally included can have, because there's lots of stats that you can show. There is a case to make, but it's still digital inclusion is still an issue for a minority of people. So and we're all used to working with people in the sector that are vulnerable, that are part of minorities, that have been excluded, so they will be facing a whole range of other barriers. So show them why digital inclusion is a gateway to providing that more holistic support, and appeal to my heart first. Tell me that impact story first, and then convince me that through the figures that it's worth doing.
David, thank you for that. That's great. I'm gonna stop recording and then just, I guess, unmute yourself or stick your hand up. Up to you guys.